Well, good morning in the room and good morning online. Do you know, sometimes it's stunning how blind the world's intelligentsia can turn out to be. The year was 1992 and I was a very junior researcher. We had just finished installing a fancy pants, state-of-the-art, high-resolution scanning electron microscope just around the corner and halfway down the corridor from my shared underground office. And on this particular day, the intercom sounded. It was David, my supervisor. Clearly, the initial trial run of this Joel 6000F was underway, and the broadcast to the entire department was, if you want to see something amazing, come to the 6000F now. I got there pretty quickly, but already by the time I arrived, there were a dozen people in the darkened room. On the screen was this crisp, low magnification image of a butterfly completely dehydrated and frozen and covered in a layer of aluminium, a few atomic layers thick, as you do. We began zooming in on the complex eye structure, and it was just so sweetly clear and crisp. Then Tony shifted to the wing and started increasing the magnification. First, he started zooming in. If you've ever picked up a dead butterfly and you get those little bits of, those granular bits of dust off the wings on your finger, kind of smaller than the grooves in your fingerprint, we started zooming in on them. There they were, neatly laid out, kind of like roof tiles on the wing. But then as we increased the magnification, soon we could see the internal structure of those tiny dusty grains. And it was as though they had ribs on the inside, or you might think of them as studs inside a wall. We increased the magnification further and we could see, wow, there are these tiny struts between the ribs, and together it was like a massive oblong lattice. And then as Tony increased the magnification, we all gasped, especially the biologists in the room, because balanced around the edges of each little oblong in that lattice work were these clusters of tiny, perfectly formed balls, a few tens of nanometres across, distinctly formed so far as we could see. These must be naturally occurring. And the gasp was, this is a moment of elegant, microscopic beauty. The phone rang in the next room. "Professor, it's for you." As he stepped out, he said, "Oh gee, I guess I better answer. God, we're looking at you." And there was a moment of general laughter, as happens in a university lab. There's a lesson that I learnt from the general laughter, and I've hung on to it ever since. Spiritual perception, or I'll call it true spiritual perception, has no particular correlation to the normal markers of social status. I'll say that again. This is a lesson I've held on to for 30 years ever since. True spiritual perception has no particular correlation to the normal markers of social status. So spiritual insight or spiritual perception is not proportional to intelligence. It's not proportional to education. It's not proportional to fame or to wealth. It's not proportional to commercial success or sporting success. It's not proportional to relationship nous. And in fact, those ingredients, for many people, hinder true spiritual perception. I've commented on this before. The extra tragedy of spiritual blindness is that, unlike physical blindness, with spiritual blindness, the blind are blind to their own blindness. They don't even know. Spiritual imperception is hardly a new phenomenon. You see it again and again and again in Mark's Gospel. Jesus' own earthly disciples who enjoy such personal and close range access to him, who witness his magnificent works and words. As you watch Jesus' disciples, they seem again and again and again to be so stunningly imperceptive. And if you read through Mark's Gospel, like in one sitting, part of what's going on, I find, is how can you guys be so thick? How can you see so much and yet be so blind? Some time ago, we crossed what I call the great dividing range of Mark's Gospel. Those questions: who do people say that I am? And what about you? Who do you say that I am? That's back in chapter 8. And ever since the great dividing range was crossed, the focus of the gospel shifts from questions of Jesus' identity to the question of his true mission. Has he just come for healing and teaching, or is there something more? With incredible gutsiness, he is heading courageously, inexorably for Jerusalem. In chapters 8, 9 and 10, he has now spoken 3 times so plainly about what will happen once he arrives in Jerusalem. Each time he's spelled it out, he's met with a, well, I think somewhat baffling, maybe somewhat understandable incomprehension from his closest circle of disciples. In chapter 8, Peter totally misses the point. In chapter 9, he's just explained, I'm going to die. And here they are arguing about who's the greatest. Chapter 10, he explains again in the greatest detail, here's what's going to happen when we get there. And now here come James and John quietly sidling up with their pride-puffed request for superhuman glory, blindly ignoring the stunning sacrifice for which Jesus is lovingly steeling himself. Why was Jesus born at all? As we approach Christmas, it's worth rethinking that question. Why was Jesus born at all? When someone asks you on Christmas Day, hey, why was Jesus born? We read this verse last week, and it's for the very first time in Mark's Gospel that it's fully disclosed. Why was Jesus born at all? The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And why was Jesus born at all? To give his life as a ransom for many. Notice that he's not a passive victim, but a proactive redeemer. And also an example for disciples to follow. Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. When someone asks you on Christmas Day, what's this all about? Just hang on to that last bit of chapter 10, verse 45. To give his life as a ransom for many. So, since that great dividing range moment back in chapter 8, they have walked literally hundreds of kilometres on foot. They are now reaching the final leg of their journey. They have forded the Jordan. From the reconstructed oasis town of Jericho, city of palms, they now have a final climb up into the hills. It's a climb of 1,100 metres, vertically speaking, from Jericho up to Jerusalem. It's kind of like Emu Plains up to Blackheath, but in half the distance, through steep and arid, lonely hills. Before all of that, though, first we meet this blind beggar. Or more to the point, this blind beggar meets Jesus. Unlike all the other healings in Mark's Gospel. This one is not left anonymous. Jesus has quite the entourage, we're told in verse 46, but now the entire retinue will come to a halt as he and we are introduced to this blind beggar by name. Socially, he's on the margins. Socially, he's sidelined. And all he can do in life is beg. But he has a name. He has a family. He has his own story and history. And Mark carefully spells out, especially for Gentile readers, what does Bartimaeus mean? Now, evidently this Bartimaeus has heard some of the stories. He's heard Jesus' reputation and he's started drawing his own conclusions. What he lacks in eyesight, he makes up for in insight. Reading from verse 46, they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, that is the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Now, compared to the proud request of James and John, Bartimaeus' plea is so appropriately humble and desperate. Can you see from the get-go, as we meet Bartimaeus, he is the model disciple. And what does he cry out? "Have mercy on me." Surely that's how any disciple should approach the Saviour, including you. Have mercy on me. Though perhaps even better is how he addresses the Saviour. It's a totally uninhibited shout, "Son of David, Jesus, have mercy on me." And as he calls out those words, "Son of David," it's the first and only time in the whole of Mark's Gospel that Jesus is addressed with this ancient, noble title. And I even wonder, is Jesus himself startled? Is Jesus himself so startled by Bartimaeus' bold insight that he stopped in his tracks? Hang on, who was that? Who figured that out? No one else has said anything like it. For 1,000 years, Israel has been waiting for a son of David. For 1,000 years, Israel has been waiting for one who would fulfill the personal promise made to great King David by God. We read this in 1 Samuel 7. This is God's promise to David. "When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you. I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son." But for all the wisdom and wealth and splendour of Solomon, Solomon himself never fulfilled the promise and, in fact, if you know the story, drifted headlong into folly. And after Solomon, there was no subsequent king who came anywhere near the glories of this promise. But now, blind Bartimaeus begging by the roadside, marginalised Bartimaeus, desperate Bartimaeus, discerns and cries out what no one else has even dared. "Jesus, you're the promised one. You're the messianic heir at last. You're the conqueror and kingdom builder for whom we've been waiting for so long. You are our forever ruler. You alone can bring healing and wholeness and hope. I may be blind, but I can see who you are. I may be blind, but I can see you're the Son of David, no less. In response, the crowd attempts to silence him, kind of tuck him away and keep him safely on the margins. I'm guessing it's something like, have you no shame? Shh. Can't you see he's too important for you? Or can't you see you're too unimportant for him? Nope. Can't you see how rude your question is? Don't go calling out such things. Or are you trying to be political? Are you asking for trouble? They barely imagine what's coming once they hit the final few kilometres into Jerusalem, do they? But Bartimaeus has heard the rumours and he has drawn his own conclusion. He will not be silenced. Dear Bartimaeus insists on using this ancient, noble title that no one else has guessed or suspected or deduced, let alone dared to cry out in public. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Again, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus, the Son of David, effectively responds, is there anyone who is too unimportant for me? Nope. If you're human, if you're an image bearer of the triune God, you matter. And Bartimaeus finds himself being treated with real countercultural dignity as he is summoned into the Saviour's presence. Do you notice as well Bartimaeus' complete trust? He throws caution to the wind and casts off his outer cloak. I think if he's guessing, if I ever need that again, I won't have too much trouble finding it. I won't be scrabbling around in the dust anymore. He leaps to his feet and stumbles forward to a life-changing encounter. Bartimaeus is not a social problem to be solved. Bartimaeus is not a medical problem to be managed. Bartimaeus is a person to be loved. I wonder if you pick up on Jesus' question in verse 51. I'm guessing as he asks this question that for James and John, standing there just off to one side a little, it must have been quite eerie as they shamefacedly remember their own self-conceited response when Jesus had asked exactly the same question back in verse 36. You notice verse 36 and verse 51, they're identical questions. And for James and John, the echo must haunt them. How could we have been so puffed with pride? The question is, verse 51, what do you want me to do for you? Jesus asked. The blind man said, Rabbi, or actually very literally the title that he uses is Rabboni, which means my master or my teacher. And you know there's only one other person in the whole of the Gospels who ever uses this exact reverent title. That's Mary Magdalene, when she discovers it's not the cemetery gardener that she's talking with on that glorious Sunday morning. Rabboni, my master, my teacher. I want to see. He doesn't ask to be superhuman like James and John had, but simply human. Now, the good news is Jesus has quite the track record responding to such petitions. If you think back through the storyline, what happened previously when he met someone with a fever, or a leper, or a paralytic, or a woman with uncontrollable bleeding, or someone deaf and mute, or a previous blind man. All it takes from Jesus is a word. Some of you know that I had cataract surgery 5 weeks ago. Even having experienced cataract surgery once before, let me tell you, that moment when the eye patch comes off, it's momentarily fearful. Is this going to work? But then, frankly, incredible. And as the vision starts to, because it's all pretty bleary at first, yes, that's a hand. That's a desk. That's a computer. It's worked. And rather than the blurry, compromised eyesight that I had gradually degrading into full blindness, as I guess would have happened 100 years ago, instead of that, the world is so brilliant and dazzling and clear and blue. And still, 5 weeks later, every single morning, I find wondrous all over again. Well, then how much more so in the ancient world with no ready access to high-tech ophthalmic surgery and starting from full blindness or near full blindness? Though there's even bigger things going on here than the healing. Verse 52, "Go, said Jesus, your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Is it any accident, as Jesus approaches Jerusalem, that his identity and mission are so neatly and sweetly articulated in a single regal title by a blind beggar who effectively says, "I'm not the blind one here. I'm the one who can see, and I know who you are. I know why you've come." They think of you just as Jesus of Nazareth, the spectacle. Seems only I can see that you're the peerless prophet who was to come. You're the serpent crusher. You're the priestly conqueror. You're the righteous branch. I wonder, maybe even, are you the suffering servant? But certainly and surely and wonderfully, you're the true long-promised Son of David. And you are my master, Rabboni, my teacher. I will follow you as long as I live. And yes, by the way, one of many things that I savoured during the final committal of our late Queen Elizabeth back in September was the recitation of her full styles and titles. But I tell you what, these are higher. These are far higher. You're the Son of David, Rabboni. And so do you see it? By acknowledging who Jesus is, Bartimaeus switches from outsider to insider. He switches from bystander to model disciple. Literally, he starts the story by the roadside. He finishes the story on the road following. And for him, life will never be the same, not just thanks to the gift of physical sight, wondrous though that is, for he has encountered the living Saviour, the heaven-born Prince of Peace, as we sang earlier, God with us, Emmanuel himself. I also wonder, did he even bother picking up that old cloak? Was it just left there as to make anyone wonder who happened to pass by? Here's the thing. True spiritual perception bears no particular correlation to the normal markers of social status. Spiritual insight is not proportional to power or fame or wealth. It's not proportional to intelligence or education. It's not even proportional to experience of life or earthly success. An infant school student can profess Christ as risen Lord, while an august professor of physics remains willfully blind. True spiritual perception is not proportional to the normal markers of worldly status. A world-renowned footballer or a performer can remain perilously blind, while an unknown African woman acknowledges Jesus' true identity and mission for the very first time, and there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels. Rejoicing, who rejoices in the presence of the angels? God himself. There is rejoicing in the presence of the angels for which one? The new believer, the new disciple, or the world-renowned performer? Or even, as I think about power, in the mid-20th century, do you know Brother Andrew would smuggle Bibles across the Iron Curtain praying this prayer as he drove his car up to the border crossing, and here are people in power, and he'd pray, Lord, you made blind eyes see, please make seeing eyes blind. Here in 2022, there's a rising suggestion in our culture that it's only those who are not blinded by creeds and doctrines who can see clearly. And, public policy should be left to those who aren't blinded by creeds and doctrines. But whenever I hear that's never quite stated quite so bluntly, it always seems so tragic to me, because that claim that it's only those who are not blinded by creeds and doctrines can see clearly, that claim displays spiritual blindness and is blind to its own blindness. It's tragic. That's why I think it's so remarkable that our late Queen's funeral was deliberately and joyfully focused on Christ, her Saviour, her Master, her Teacher. And how do we imagine she will now address the risen Son of David? Your Majesty. Because she knows who he really is. In Mark's storyline, it all begins with this humble model disciple, dear Bartimaeus, voicing a startling truth that no one else has dared. Son of David, have mercy on me. That's the plea of a model disciple. Will you join him? Dare you join him?